what's up, hello, my name is Emma, and today I'm going to be talking about some books I have recently read. I am sorry if I am looking a little tired or disheveled, maybe acting a little delusional. I have been at it nonstop for like 12 hours today. It has been a long one. But the last thing on my to-do list is to talk to you about books. So like, what better way to end my night? Today, I'm going to be talking about some books I have recently read. This episode of Recent Reads covers like mid-August to kind of like mid or end October. But I feel like my reading has really increased in the second half of the year, which I'm super pleased about. And I read some great books that I can't wait to talk about. Before we jump into today's video, I know you just love hearing that at the start of a YouTube video, don't you? Today's video is kindly being sponsored by Book of the Month. Book of the Month is a subscription service that is dedicated to promoting new and emerging authors and helping readers discover new books they will love. I really love Book of the Month, which is why I work with them so frequently on my channel. Every month, without fail, they consistently have at least one book of their choices that's totally in line with my reading interests. But honestly, most times, multiple of their choices are books that I could really see myself reading. And in the spirit of the holidays, Book of the Month is now offering 3 different gifting options for you or the reader in your life to enjoy. They have a 3-month subscription for $49.99, a 6-month subscription for $89.99, or a 12-month full year subscription to Book of the Month for $169.99. But no matter which package you choose, you are always going to be getting the best price for new fiction hardcover releases that you can't get in any other store. You can have your gift card emailed to the recipient of your gift, you can print it out at home, or you can get a gift card that is physical mailed to you. And to kick off the gifting season, I am going to be giving away 2 Book of the Month gift cards for a 6-month subscription, totally free, to 2 of you watching this video right now. To enter, all you have to do is click the Rafflecopter link in the description, and it'll actually give you a couple of different ways you can gain more entries and better your chances of winning. This giveaway is open to US and Puerto Rico residents only, and the giveaway will end on November 30th. So good luck to you all and happy holidays. So the first book I have recently read is one I have been so excited to talk about and review on my channel, and that is Heroine by Mindy McGinnis. This is a YA contemporary that follows a high school softball star who gets into a car accident and quickly and unexpectedly finds herself in the world of a drug addiction. I gave Heroine 5 out of 5 stars. I definitely think it's a favorite of the year for me because I finished it in like 2 sittings, and once I started reading, I like literally would not allow myself to do anything else until I finished. This book is gritty, raw, dark, and brutal. It's the type of book that's really going to make you uncomfortable and probably gross you out at sometimes. It has really graphic depictions of opioid abuse, withdrawal, and death, so it is definitely not for the faint of heart. I'm really open about my experiences with mental illness on my channel, but what I've always neglected to mention is that I have a very personal history with substance abuse as well that started when I was a teenager. And these aren't things that I'm necessarily comfortable talking in depth about on my channel right now, but I would like to in the future. So this book really resonated with me as stories of teens with substance abuse are very rarely talked about outside of an educational context, but I felt even more connected to it and impacted by it reading from my perspective as an adult. Heroine really showcases that absolutely anybody can fall into the world of a drug addiction. No one is safe, regardless of your past experiences or views on drug use. This book was just so powerful, emotional, and impactful for me, and I would really love to see more people reading it, whether you are someone like me who could maybe relate to Mickey, or if you are just interested in learning more about what the real life of people with addiction looks like. The only real criticism I can offer from this book is that the characters outside of Mickey are not all that well developed and they're not given a lot of attention. It's really character-based, focused on Mickey and her story. There is some conflict there with friends, responsibilities, and family, but these are all things that are of course impacted by addiction. But I think that fact really speaks to the all-consuming nature of addiction, and it was intentional for that reason. So I feel like this book really set out to accomplish everything it intended. It's a new favorite of mine. I can totally foresee myself rereading it in the future, and I would just highly, highly recommend. I think I want to put this on my contemporary favorites shelf because I just love it way too much. Over the last couple of months, I have been making it through my somewhat yearly reread of the Mortal Instruments series by Cassandra Clare. Now, this is, I was trying to think about this earlier, and we are reaching the point of me not remembering how many times I have read this series. I think we're at 11. I'm pretty sure this is my 11th reread. I have been listening to the audiobooks for this reread. I'm currently listening to City of Lost Souls and just like living my best Shadowhunter life. Honestly, I don't know what else to say about these books at this point. Like, if you've spent 5 seconds on my channel, you know that Shadowhunters is my favorite series of all time. I love rereading City of Bones because every time I'm just like automatically transported to being 17 and discovering the story for the very first time. So it holds a lot of like nostalgia for me. I will say every time I reread the series, I definitely notice some of the constructive issues in like the writing and the plot and character dynamics that exist in the first few books because they were the first novels of Cassie Clare. I used to really dismiss City of Ashes as like one of the worst books in this series, and now I feel that it's just like one of my least favorite by default because they can't all have that top spot. It's definitely not the strongest of the series, but especially in terms of like the character development and their interactions, like I've grown a greater appreciation for it over the years. City of Glass is always good. It is like one of the top tier Mortal Instruments books, one of my favorites through and through, and each time it is just like such an extraordinary process and story to go through. And City of Fallen Angels is a book that my opinions have drastically changed since reading it for the first time. I also consider this one like one of the worst. I thought it was just a filler book to bridge the gap between the story in City of Glass and City of Lost Souls. But I love City of Fallen Angels now. Like, I surprised myself with how excited I got for this reread. The plot of this book is definitely weaker compared to the masterpiece of City of Glass, but the character dynamics and the tension between them, there is just a lot of growth and development that exists in this book, and I feel like it gets overshadowed by some of those more negative opinions a lot. What I will say about all of the audiobooks of the Mortal Instruments series is that they're not my favorite. I really would hope that sometime in the future they do a re-recording of all of them, whether it's a full cast or just like 1 or 2 narrators. I just think it needs to be updated. But the audiobook for City of Fallen Angels is by far my least favorite because not only is the male narrator like very monotoned all throughout it, but he gives like all of the male characters Brooklyn accents that are just really fake and totally take me out of the story. So I don't necessarily like love listening to the audio experience of these books. It's more because it's a great way for me to do a reread while focusing my physical reading on new stories. But I do just enjoy like being wrapped in Cassie Clare books and the Shadowhunter world, and it has just been such a pick-me-up these last couple of months to be continuing through this 11th reread. So in August, I filmed a 24-hour reading vlog, which was so much fun, and I'd really like to do more of these in the future, but I managed to read 3 books, a whopping 3, during those 24 hours. So if you're interested in checking it out and especially getting like more in-depth and in the moment thoughts on these next 3 books, I definitely recommend checking that one out in the description. The first book is an audiobook that I listened to, which is The Black Flamingo by Dean Atta, and I believe it was also narrated by the author. This book is a young adult coming of age story that is written in verse, and it follows a mixed race gay teen living in London as he is coming to terms with his identity and really learning to accept himself. This book was absolutely phenomenal. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars because it just like warmed my heart to read. This book stands out to me because it is so uplifting. It really focuses on the celebration of self-discovery as opposed to many other coming-of-age stories that focus in on the pain and suffering involved in exploring themes of sexuality, gender expression, and racial identity. Those stories are invaluable and need to be told, but historically, those are the only kind of books that have been allowed to be published, and we really need to work to stop making the minority experience synonymous with only pain. So it brings me so much joy when we get own voices stories like this one that have a beautiful lyrical prose and explore these themes through a lens of self-empowerment. This book has a really intimate view on what it is like to enter the drag community, which I enjoyed learning more about, and it also focuses on how spoken word and poetry can be used as a coping mechanism that really allows you to find yourself. It was impactful and captivating and just a book that I think everyone should read. The only downside I feel to it is that the ending wrapped up really quickly, and that is like a common pet peeve in books for me. I always want there to be a bit more falling action, but it's also like a super quick read. The audiobook is like 4 to 5 hours. It'll take you no time at all to read it, and it is definitely worth experiencing. During that 24-hour reading vlog, I read Spinning by Tilly Walden, and this is a graphic novel memoir that is another coming-of-age story following a young girl who has spent pretty much all of her life very dedicated to figure skating and kind of what happens as she discovers there may be more she wants to explore in life. I found this book really compelling when I first read it. Like, go figure is one of my favorite Disney Channel original movies, and the author is also a lesbian, so there is a whole theme of coming out and accepting yourself with your sexuality. And because it's a memoir, I want to be really sensitive to the author's own experiences, but this book was kind of a letdown for me. It just didn't really fulfill my expectations, and I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. Now, this is just a personal preference for me, but I typically prefer like a lot more detail and expression in graphic novels because we're so reliant on the illustrations to carry the story, and so it just didn't fulfill that for me. There's a lot of important themes in this story, as I said, in regards to sexuality, feeling isolated and lonely from your family and peers. It explores bullying and sexual assault, and I feel that these were all really well done, of course, because they are based on someone's real experiences. And my favorite thing about the story is that it depicts the very difficult experience of having something that you once loved so much and was your entire life, and deciding that that isn't for you anymore, and all of the repercussions internally and externally that come with that. It is like a really nuanced position to be in, and I think this book explored it very well. But one of my biggest pet peeves of the book is that the pacing was like really bizarre. It spans a lot of years of the author's life, and I can see how that would be difficult to accomplish in one singular book. But the narrative was clunky and not cohesive. It just felt that there was a lot more that was like initially a part of the story that like had to be cut out. Something really jarring that I came across while reading is that like the main character apparently has a twin brother, and it was like 100 pages in until it was mentioned, and I'm like, why didn't we know that she had a twin brother? And then she mentioned it so casually. And it was also like a really emotional story, but it just didn't provoke anything within me. Like, I liked Tilly as a character, but she was the only one that I really knew anything about, so it was difficult to stay connected and engaged in the story. And the other thing I didn't like is that the ending kind of just left me hanging. Like, I feel like we went through so much in this book, and there was little resolution at the end to show for it. So not the best book I've ever read. It definitely has some flaws, but I feel that if any of the topics I mentioned feel like they would speak to you, it is still worth reading. And the last book that I read during that 24-hour reading vlog is An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. So this is a very unique story about a young woman who stumbles across a like 10-foot statue that has appeared out of absolutely nowhere, and it turns out that they have shown up all across the world. And so April is one of the very first people to post online about it, so she gains a lot of fame, and it kind of follows her and her friends throughout this experience of trying to figure out like, who are the Carls, what are they doing here? I really liked this book. It was super fun and engaging. Like, yes, I did read it for like a 24-hour read along, so I set out to read it very quickly, but once I started, I did not want to put it down because I was that engaged. My favorite types of science fiction novels tend to be the ones that take place in our modern world, but like something about it has slightly changed and that impacts how the world works. So it was like totally in line with the science fiction books I enjoy. I really did enjoy the writing style. I feel like I've seen some mixed reviews of it online, and it is a debut novel, but it worked really well for me. I found it easy to read and very humorous. Okay, like, I hope you'll hear me out with this, but like, I know that John Green and Hank Green are brothers, right? But if I could eliminate that fact, I would still firmly believe that, like, if you are a fan of John Green books, you would enjoy An Absolutely Remarkable Thing. There's just something about the vibes that I feel are very comparable. I feel like it's a combination of, like, the way the characters are written as well as the writing style, but I really think that if you've been a John Green fan in the past, you would enjoy An Absolutely Remarkable Thing. I think my favorite thing about this book was the discussion about the impact of fame and social media. What I really took away from this book is that absolutely anyone could go randomly viral like April, and it was really fascinating to watch her character arc as she grows to have this new platform and voice, and what that really does to her ego and values. And I love a book with some mystery, so like the action throughout was fun for me to follow. There were two main things I didn't like about this book. Number one being the pacing, which felt very unbalanced. Some chapters felt very fleshed out and like followed days in chronological order, but then all of a sudden a chapter would start like 3 weeks later, and I'm like, what happened in those 3 weeks? I want to know. It was kind of difficult to grasp the timeline. Like, I would have thought that this book took place over a couple of weeks, but it seems like it took place over multiple months, and I feel like that is just like a skill that could be honed with being a more experienced writer. And my other issue is that the ending was unsatisfying for me. This is another critique I've seen in a lot of reviews, and people usually follow it up with, but I'm glad that there's a sequel, so like things can be answered. But my issue is not in like the open-endedness of the ending. My issue is that the resolution of these main questions of like, who are the Carls and why are they here, was like deeply disappointing. It just felt super underdeveloped to me. Like Hank Green had put all of his effort into crafting this story and world and the characters, but then he like had to write an ending, so it just felt like a cop-out. Overall, I really had so much fun reading this book. I think I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I'm super excited to dive into the sequel because I hope I will love it just as much, if not more. So next up, we have a bit of a hot topic book in the book community this year, and that is Midnight Sun by Stephenie Meyer. Unless you live under a rock, you have heard of Midnight Sun. It is Twilight written from Edward's perspective that was initially being written like however many years ago when Twilight was at its height, but it got leaked and like Twihards just had to accept that it was never being published, and then all of a sudden it was here. I decided to listen to the audiobook of Midnight Sun, which I think was a really good choice for me because of how big it is. And that's the first thing that I want to say about Midnight Sun. It was just excessively long. Like, there is absolutely no reason why this book had to be this big. It was super drawn out for absolutely no reason, and it could have used some like really hard editing down. An interesting takeaway from Midnight Sun that I was not expecting is that I liked Bella a lot more in Midnight Sun than I did in the initial Twilight series. I have always liked Bella more than some people and found her to be a stronger, more interesting character than most, but reading her through Edward's perspective, she was so much more likable. And on the flip side of that, with me being like a die-hard Team Edward throughout the years, I liked Edward significantly less. So this book was actually a really fascinating lesson on how much our view of the characters depends on the perspective and view of the character who is narrating it. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Like, reading from Bella's perspective, we're hearing about how wonderful and caring Edward is. And then when we're reading from Edward's perspective, Bella is seen as much more likable and has a more attractive personality. So where my newfound dislike of Edward comes in is, number one, just because he was so dramatic and angsty. Like, I know Twilight is like the epitome of teen angst, but like, oh my god, was it a lot to handle. I will say the most interesting component of reading from his perspective was to really see his animalistic nature and like that predatory instinct he has as a vampire, which we don't get when reading from Bella. So like, that was something I really enjoyed. But what I was really looking for in Midnight Sun was some kind of like explanation or just anything that would have assuaged many of my concerns and problems with his stalking and controlling behavior that was never addressed in the original Twilight Saga. It unfortunately just reinforced all the problems I had and made them even more glaring. Like, the most self-awareness we got from him was like, I know this is bad, but I just can't stop. It was like the biggest opportunity an author could possibly have to add to a character's arc, and it added nothing. The other good thing about reading from Edward's perspective was that we get to learn a lot more about the Cullen family, whom I love and was really excited to read more about, because their stories are all spread throughout all 4 of the Twilight books. So it was really nice to get some of that insight into like who they are and their pasts just in this one novel. In regard to the writing, I want to say it is like marginally better. I did like how descriptive it was, and I noticed a lot of metaphors that were pleasing to read, but it just wasn't notable enough of a change for me to really say that the writing is better. And also along the same lines of like using this as an opportunity to correct problems in the initial Twilight Saga, I was also like maybe too hopeful that we could get some sort of awareness about what Twilight and the franchise has done to the Quileute tribe. It's just been 10 years of criticism about the treatment of the Quileute people in Twilight, and while I recognize that much of that criticism is central to the construction of the world, and there's not much about that you can change in a sequel for continuity, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I knew about all these concerns when I was a teenager reading it, but it's something I've become aware of as an adult, and I can't really separate Twilight from it anymore. So I was just like overly hopeful that there would be some effort to address those concerns in this book, but Midnight Sun made it clear that Stephenie Meyer just doesn't care in or out of text. I will say, out of all of the recent releases of a like prequel or sequel or like follow-up story to a previously successful series, Midnight Sun was one of the most engaging ones that I've read, and I feel like that's really attributed to my prior strong investment in Twilight and not because Midnight Sun is like exceptional or anything. I do think it was a fun read. I think it's a worthwhile read for people like myself who really loved Twilight in their youth and are looking forward to diving back into that world, but it adds absolutely nothing new or innovative to Twilight. It is totally like fan service, but I'm the type of reader that's kind of okay with that. Next up, I read another new favorite book of the year, and that is The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. This book was amazing. I have been so excited to talk about it, and the second I finished it, I was like heartbroken that I probably should dedicate my time to reading something new instead of rereading it immediately. This book takes place in a world where people with magical abilities coexist with people who don't have magical abilities, and those that don't oppress those that do. Our main character's name is Linus, and he is a government employee who evaluates the effectiveness of magical orphanages. So he is given the very special task of traveling to a very isolated and recluse orphanage that hosts some of the most peculiar and some may consider dangerous children with these magical abilities. This book was absolutely fantastic. I don't know if I really have like a bad word to say about it. I just feel it is so quality in every component that matters. I believe this is an adult fantasy, but it really feels like it is written like a middle grade. It is so whimsical and colorful, light and fun, and for that reason I feel that it really would attract and satisfy readers of like all ages. The characters are honestly the best part of this story. They are all so layered and well developed, and it is like so hard not to fall in love with them and become insanely attached. They are just so charming and humorous and wonderful, and I adore them all. An unsuspecting surprise when reading this book is discovering that there was a very soft, cute queer romance that I just loved watching grow throughout the story, and I felt it was integrated really well, where the romance does not overtake the story, like it's not a romance novel at all. I loved the magical aspects of this story. It's a very low fantasy, so if you're someone like me who like shies away from super intense fantasies, I promise this one is perfect for you. I actually feel like I would have liked even more magic, but overall it was just fun and exciting and very unique. And the thematic elements of this book were absolutely great. It explores a lot about preconceived notions, power dynamics, and oppression, but also like self-discovery and thinking for yourself. The only real critique I have is that like the overall story was pretty predictable. It was very clear to me from the beginning that Linus was going to go there and meet these people and they were going to change his life, and then there was going to be some conflict, but in the end he would choose them. So like the bare bones and skeleton of this story is not anything new or special, but the characters and the world and the magic and just like the intricacies of this story are something truly unique and impactful. I'm totally adding this to my list of like stories I will always want to reread, and because this is the first book that I've read from TJ Klune, I am like dying to devour more of his works in the future. So I loved it, and I would put it at like the top of my recommendations list. And the last book for me to talk about on my recent reads is Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. This was one of my most anticipated books of the year because I've read 2 out of 3 of Tiffany Jackson's other books, and I've really enjoyed them, and the plot of Grown just really stood out to me, so I knew I was going to love it. This book follows a young aspiring singer named Enchanted who quickly becomes engulfed in the world of a musician named Corey Fields. So Enchanted and Corey begin having this romantic relationship, and Enchanted thinks that like he's going to make all of her dreams come true, but Corey really shows this darker, more abusive side of himself, and Enchanted finds herself in a situation that she doesn't know how she got there or how she can get out. This book was really phenomenal. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I feel it really satisfied my expectations I had going in, which were pretty high. This book is a super fast read. It's a YA contemporary you will absolutely fly through, not just because the story itself really grabs you, but the chapters are really short. The chapters are like 5 pages, and I often find those books so much easier to get through. There are some obvious parallels in this fiction novel to the very real story of R. Kelly, but I really like the author's note that makes it clear that like this is not a novel inspired by R. Kelly or the survivors of R. Kelly. It's all about the young Black women in life who are mistreated and taken advantage of and are not believed when they are experiencing abuse. The story does carry like this oddly light tone because you get so invested and you just want to keep reading, but it of course explores some really dark, disturbing themes, and I feel like it's especially important for anyone who has not experienced an abusive relationship to read it. I just felt so deeply enchanted by Enchanted. That wasn't even intentional. Enchanted's story is just really profound and impactful. Like, I was just rooting for this girl this entire time to be safe and get what she wanted out of life, and like these types of hard-hitting contemporaries are some of my favorite books to read. The main issue that I fell into with Grown is kind of difficult to talk about without spoilers, but I'm gonna do my best. So in this book, I was kind of presented with a trope of plot twists that I do not like. It feels really cheap and for shock value, and it's interesting because it's in the same kind of category of the twist that I did not like in Tiffany G. Jackson's other book, Monday's Not Coming. The good thing is, the way the story is resolved, the twist is not like real. Like, it pans out so that the book doesn't actually play into that trope that I don't like. So I was satisfied in the end, which I can't really hold against this book in its entirety, but I will say when I was reading, I was just like, no, no, please no.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
Don't ruin this book that I love so much. And even when things change in the end, like having that experience when you read a book will definitely take away from it. Overall, I adored this book. It's definitely a new contemporary fave for me. I also gotta find a spot for it on my contemporary faves shelf. I recommend reading it and anything else from Tiffany D. Jackson because she is definitely one of my favorites. So that is it for this next episode of Recent Reads, which I really hope you guys enjoyed. These like reading wrap-ups and mini reviews, whatever you want to call them, are always some of my favorite videos to film because I really get to give you my in-depth thoughts about the books that I have recently read and what I liked or disliked about them. In the comments below, I am super curious to know what books you have recently read and what you thought of them, or if you've read any of the books I talked about today and what your thoughts were. I adore talking about all the books that we read in the comments. It's my favorite part about being a booktuber and interacting with you guys. But that is it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you soon for a new one. Bye!